Hello, crafty friends, and welcome to my channel, Create with Kalia. I'm Kalia. Today I'm going to be creating a two-page layout using these photographs. I'm going to start with some desert sand cardstock. This is an old, long-retired cardstock from close to my heart. I'm going to trim both pages down to 9 inches. These pieces of cardstock will become the center of both sides of my layout. I plan to do a layout that mirrors itself on both sides of the layout. Once I've trimmed both pieces of cardstock down to 9 inches, I'm going to use some white gloss spray to splatter some paint on both pieces of cardstock. This will just create some additional visual interest to the layout that I'm creating. I take my gloss spray and shake it a little bit, and then I pull out the sprayer so that I can use the stem of the sprayer to flick paint onto both pieces of the cardstock. I tap against something rigid to help make the droplets a little bit more uniform and to help make them a little bit smaller size. As you can see, I do get a couple of larger droplets, but I'm not worried about those. I'll just use my photographs or some embellishment to cover up any areas that I don't like. Because my photos are black and white, I've had a vision in my head of using a black and white paper pack. I ended up pulling out my For Always paper from close to my heart. This was a paper pack from several years ago that was primarily done in blacks, whites, and grays. And I thought that this would be perfect for my photographs and for the theme of my layout. I grabbed two pieces of paper and have trimmed 2 inches off of the bottom of each of the pieces of paper. I then trim another 2 inches off of the piece of paper. This will end up being the top and the bottom banners for each side of my layout. And as I've said, I'm planning on doing a layout that mirrors itself, and that's why I've cut both pieces of paper at the same measurements. Now I can ensure that the banners on both the top and the bottom of the page will match each other. I'm now taking about a 1/4 inch and tearing the edge of my paper to give it some additional visual interest. I found that the best way to achieve the look that I'm going for is to work in small sections and to tear slowly and tear towards myself. And that will give you a relatively even tear across the entire sheet of paper. My first photograph is a 5 by 7, and here I'm looking at what a 1/4 inch border would look like. I realize I don't like that, so I slide it down just a little bit and realize that I do like the 1/8 inch border much more. So I'm going to cut my black cardstock down to 7 1/4 by 5 1/4, which will give me a 1/8 inch border around the entire photograph. My other two pictures that I plan to use for this layout are 4 by 6s, so I will cut black cardstock down to 4 1/4 by 6 1/4 inches so that I have the same 1/8 inch border around each of those photographs as well. I'm creating today's layout for a celebration of life for my father who recently passed. The 5 by 7 that I'll be using on the left-hand page of this layout is of my grandparents, my dad's parents, when they married in 1943. This picture always hung in their home, which then became our family's cabin until we sold it in 2016. The picture now hangs in its original frame in my sister's home, and she was able to take a photo of the picture and send it to me so that I could work on making this layout and also have a copy of the picture for myself. The other picture that I currently have for this layout is a picture of my grandfather, my dad, my dad's brother, and my dad's sister when they were all little. My dad was the youngest sibling, so in this picture, he's the little guy in white. I do have another picture in mind that I would like to use for the layout. However, I don't currently have a copy of that photo, so what I plan to do is to leave an open piece of black cardstock so that I can add the photo at a later date. I like this orientation of my photos, so now I'm going to work on putting down my desert sand cardstock. I just pointed out that there were a few droplets that got a little larger than I would have liked. However, it won't be an issue for me to cover those up with my photographs. I'm going to add some adhesive to the back of my cardstock, and then I'll be attaching that right into the middle of a white piece of backing cardstock. I keep the white cardstock behind layouts that I build like this in part to give some stability, especially when I'm layering multiple pieces of paper on top of each other. It's not entirely necessary, but I find it makes it sometimes easier to do so. I'm going to line this up at 1.5 inches down from the top of my paper. And I'm using a Versamat to help make sure that I have my paper lined up evenly across the entire piece of white cardstock. Once I have my cardstock pressed down, I'm going to take my pattern paper and work on ruffling the edge a little bit. I've already torn the edge, but now I'm going to use my thumb and my finger to just try to ruffle the edge a little bit more. This will give the paper some additional visual interest. I'm going to do this for all 4 pieces of the pattern paper that I'm using on this layout. When I do this, I'm pulling the torn edge up a little bit so that when it is down on the cardstock, there will be a little bit of a shadow and a little bit of additional movement to the paper. Again, I'm going to do that to all 4 pieces, and then I'm going to adhere those pieces down onto my layout. This paper does have a little bit of directionality to it, so I was careful to make sure that when I tore my edges, I tore the same edge for both the top and for the bottom so that the paper would all be facing in the same direction. As I'm putting my dry adhesive down, you'll see that I'm staying away from the ruffled edge of the paper, since I want that to stick up just a little bit to create that extra movement. Once I have all 4 pieces of pattern paper down, I'm ready to bring my photographs back in and start building up the rest of my layout. I realize that I didn't leave myself quite enough room for 2 4 1/4 pieces of cardstock to be stacked. And so I slide one of my photographs over and realize that I can overlap them just at a corner, and I'm happy with that. I then bring in some additional pattern cardstock from the 4 Always paper pack to decide what papers I might want to use for embellishments. I really like the doily paper and the white paper with the script on it. I also pull out the fancy doilies thin cut set from Close to My Heart. I thought that this would work really well for some embellishments for this layout, and I think that it works really well with the theme of my layout. I cut 2 of the smaller doilies to embellish around my smaller photographs, and one of the large doily to embellish around my 5x7. Now I'm just going to play around with the placement and see if I can figure out where I like those. For right now, I really like them in these 2 areas, and then I had known that I was planning on using the larger doily behind the 5x7 photograph in the upper corner. As I play around with the placement more, I realize that I'm going to have a lot of this doily wasted behind my photograph, and that might be nice to have a little bit of the doily pattern carry through to the lower part of my 5x7. I trim off a little piece that would be covered anyway by my photograph, and I really like adding that extra piece to the bottom right of my photograph. I feel like that helps balance things out a little bit more. Next, I use Close to My Heart's buildable tag set to cut some tags out of the white paper with some script on it. I cut out one of the larger rectangular tag and 2 of the smaller rectangular tag. Again, the script does have some directionality to it, so I made sure to flip the paper when I cut one of the tags that will face the opposite way of the other 2 tags. I also cut one large tag and 2 smaller tags with black cardstock using the rounded tag to use as some additional embellishments for this layout. I'm really liking how this is starting to come together, but realize that I don't like the doilies where I've placed them by the 4x6s now that I have the tags. I move those over to the corners of the picture and realize that I like that placement much better. So at this point, I'm going to work on placing the tags a little bit more Double check that I like where I'm seeing those, and then I'll be able to start adhering some things down. One trick to help make sure that your embellishments end up where you want them is to place things and make sure that you have them situated where you want without having them adhered down. Then lifting them slightly and putting some adhesive down behind them, which you'll see me do right here. This makes sure that the tags are exactly where I decided that I thought that they looked best. And now I have them adhered down where I want them without having to pull them out and put adhesive on the back, then try to put them back where I thought that I liked them. I pulled some black and white ribbon out of my stash and have started adding some ribbon embellishment to each of my tags. I think that this helps give the tags a little bit more finished look. The ribbon that I used for the large white tag was so thick that I did end up tearing the tag as I tried to tie it. So instead of tying it, I tied a bow and I will adhere that down on top of the tag to make it look like it's tied using just a couple of glue dots. I also like to put glue dots down on the end of my ribbon before I adhere it down onto my cardstock when the ribbon is short or I have a specific direction I want to make sure that it faces. Additionally, I like to make sure that I cut the ends of my ribbon at an angle, which helps prevent it from unraveling. You'll see that I work on bending the ribbon since the dots are only on one side, then use my scissors to trim the ribbon at an angle. I'm also going to use some additional glue dots on this piece of ribbon because I do want to make sure that the dots stay right side up and visible. I'm going to finish placing the remainder of my tags and adhering them down. Then I'm going to start working on my title. I used Design Space to create my title, which I then printed on my printer and cut out using my Cricut. I was able to create a second layer so that I have the black border of cardstock around the title as well. I had initially thought that I would place this title up in the left-hand corner and think maybe I'll move it down here, but I realized that the white tag doesn't stick out enough for it to feel anchored for me, so I do move it back up into the left-hand position that I had originally envisioned. You can see that I've already added my journaling on the bottom left of my right-hand page, and now that I have my title adhered down, my layout is complete. I'm very happy with how this turned out. I think it's a beautiful layout that shows that you don't need a lot of complicated embellishments for something to turn out beautifully. I love that these doilies have a little bit of movement and aren't flat down onto the page. And I also think that my tags created a lot of interest without overwhelming the page. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll like and subscribe. And here's one more video you might enjoy. You can also head on over to my Instagram to see how the layout turned out with the last picture added. Thanks for watching and craft on.